Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're shining a light on something most of us experience but rarely examine deeply.
Care work.
Yeah, care work.
You know, the behind-the-scenes stuff that keeps families and societies running.
It's the glue that holds everything together.
It's the glue that holds everything together, yet it's often invisible, undervalued, even taken for granted.
Exactly. And we're not just talking about who's doing the dishes after dinner.
Right.
We're talking about the full spectrum of activities, from looking after children and elders to supporting those with disabilities. These are the very things that allow a society to function.
Think of it as the bedrock of our social infrastructure. Without care work, the world as we know it would grind to a halt.
Okay, so we've established that care work is crucial, but what makes it so complex?
The UN's International Labor Organization, the ILO, dug into this back in 2018 with a massive report.
And the findings are pretty eye-opening.
One of the most striking takeaways is the sheer gender imbalance when it comes to unpaid care work.
Globally, women carry a disproportionate share of these responsibilities.
And we're not talking about a small difference here.
This isn't just about who grabs the mail on the way in.
Right.
The ILO found that, on average, women spend 3.1 hours every day on unpaid care and housework compared to just 1.4 hours for men.
That's more than double the workload.
That gap is enormous.
It's not just a matter of personal choice.
Right.
This imbalance is deeply intertwined with societal norms, expectations, and even cultural factors that have solidified over generations.
So it's not as simple as saying, well, they chose to do it.
There are bigger forces at play here.
Say.
The report even highlights the concept of global pair chains, where women from less economically developed countries migrate to wealthier nations, specifically to provide care work.
Often leaving their own children back home.
Right.
That adds another layer of complexity to the issue.
It's not just happening within families.
It's woven into the fabric of the global economy.
Exactly. And this all circles back to a crucial question. How does this unequal distribution of unpaid care work affect women's ability to participate in the workforce?
To have what we traditionally think of as jobs.
Exactly.
Right, because if someone is spending twice as much time on these invisible tasks, it's going to affect their ability to show up for a 9-to-5.
Or even pursue education and career advancement.
And that's where we start seeing the very real consequences of this imbalance.
The ILO's research shows that 45.1% of women who are unpaid carers are outside the formal workforce.
To be clear, that means they don't have traditional jobs with salaries and benefits.
And when we compare this to women with no direct care responsibilities, only 42.6% of them are outside the formal workforce.
So even a small difference like that.
It means millions of women are essentially being shut out of economic opportunities because they're shouldering the weight of care.
That's huge.
It is. And this economic disadvantage, what researchers call the care penalty, has a ripple effect. It's not just about lost income in the present. It's about missed promotions, stunted earning potential, and ultimately a lower likelihood of having a secure retirement.
So caring for loved ones is literally costing women their financial futures.
In many cases, yes. And sadly, this isn't just a problem in countries with less developed social safety nets.
Right.
Even high-income nations, particularly those with limited access to public care services, grapple with this challenge.
It sounds like we're facing a global care crisis. So where do we go from here?
How do we begin to untangle this web of social norms and economic structures to create a system that supports both women and families?
That's where well-crafted policies come into play.
The ILO report offers a compelling framework for addressing this, the Triple R approach.
The Triple R. Okay, I'm intrigued. Let's dive into this framework. How can policies create real change in this often invisible world of care work?
The first R stands for recognizing. For too long, care work has been brushed aside as women's work, or just part of life's natural order. We need policies that formally acknowledge and value this labor, shifting our perception of it.
So instead of seeing it as something that just happens, we start valuing it as a contribution to society.
Right.
What might that look like in action?
Absolutely. Let's look at pension systems. In Bolivia and Uruguay, women actually receive pension credits for the time they've dedicated to raising children.
That's a huge step towards giving credit where it's due.
But what about the reducing part of the Triple R? Is it even possible to lessen the actual workload on individuals?
Can you really legislate less dishwashing?
Well, we might not be able to make dishes disappear, but policies can certainly help.
Right.
Remember when we talked about infrastructure?
Mm-hmm.
Imagine you're a woman living in a rural community and you spend hours each day just fetching water for your family.
You're right. I'm picturing myself in that situation, and it makes my daily commute seem like a breeze. So, you're saying that same woman could save hours of time if her community had access to clean water?
Yes. Think about the hours that woman would save, hours she could now spend on other activities, maybe even pursuing an education or a livelihood that was previously out of reach.
That's a fantastic example.
It shows how seemingly unrelated policies can have this ripple effect, easing burdens and opening up possibilities, especially for women.
Absolutely. And it's not just about water.
Access to electricity, sanitation, childcare facilities, these are all examples of how smart investments in public infrastructure can significantly reduce the time and energy demands on individuals, particularly women, who often bear the brunt of unpaid care responsibilities.
You're right. It's easy to overlook how much these fundamental services impact people's daily lives. It's almost like we're coming to the end of part 1 here. But before we move on, we've talked about recognizing the value of care work and reducing its burden through infrastructure and other measures. But what about the redistributing aspect? How can we shift societal norms to encourage a more balanced approach to sharing care work between genders?
That's where things get really interesting.
Let's go there. We have to move beyond simply acknowledging the problem and start challenging those deeply rooted gender roles that have shaped our societies for generations.
It sounds like we need a cultural shift as much as a policy shift.
Where do we even begin?
Well, paternity leave policies are a fantastic place to start.
Uh-huh.
You see, when we guarantee paid time off for fathers after the birth or adoption of a child,
Right.
we're not just supporting individual families, we're changing social expectations around fatherhood.
It's sending a clear message that caregiving isn't just a mother's duty, it's a shared responsibility.
Precisely. It normalizes the idea of involved fathers and allows men to create those crucial bonds with their children from a young age.
And this, in turn, can have a cascading effect, influencing future generations and helping to dismantle those traditional gender roles that confine caregiving to the domestic sphere.
That's so important.
We need men to feel empowered to take on caregiving roles, not pressured into being the sole breadwinner while their partners shoulder the burden at home.
Exactly. And speaking of support systems.
Let's not forget about the vital role of public childcare. Access to affordable, high-quality childcare is a game changer for families, especially women.
It allows women to participate in the workforce without having to choose between their careers and their children.
You got it. When childcare is accessible and affordable,
Right.
it benefits everyone. Parents can pursue their professional goals, children get a head start in their development and education, and the economy benefits from the talents and skills of a more diverse workforce.
It's a win-win situation. But we've talked a lot about how different countries approach this issue in different ways.
So let's zoom out a bit.
Does the ILO report offer any insights into how care work plays out in different parts of the world?
It does. It's fascinating to see how cultural norms and economic realities intersect to shape caregiving arrangements around the globe.
Take, for example, the migrant in the family model, prevalent in Southern Europe.
Right, where families rely on migrant domestic workers, often women who have left their own children and families behind.
Exactly. And while this model provides employment opportunities for some women, it also raises concerns about exploitation, particularly when these workers lack proper legal protections and are vulnerable to abuse.
It highlights those global power dynamics we were discussing earlier.
Precisely. And then you have models like the Scandinavian system, which we mentioned earlier, renowned for its extensive public childcare programs and generous parental leave policies for both mothers and fathers.
It seems like they've taken a much more collectivist approach, recognizing caregiving as a societal responsibility, not just an individual or family burden.
You hit the nail on the head. The Scandinavian model demonstrates that investing in comprehensive social safety nets, including robust childcare systems and parental leave, not only benefits families but can also boost gender equality and overall economic growth.
It's proof that a different way is possible.
Oh, exactly. Each country has its unique approach, shaped by its history, cultural values, and available resources. But the ILO report makes one thing crystal clear. Regardless of the specific model, every country needs to prioritize care work and address the gender imbalances that persist within this sector.
So we've examined the challenges of unpaid care work, explored potential policy solutions, and zoomed out to consider global variations in caregiving arrangements. But what about the future of care work itself?
Is there hope amidst these complex and deeply rooted issues? I know, right? It's time we start changing that narrative. Think about it this way. The global population is aging rapidly.
That's true. We're living longer, which is generally a good thing,
Yeah.
but it also means a growing need for care as we age.
You've got it. And as the demand for care services skyrockets, so does the potential for job creation in this sector. We're talking about a wide range of professions, from nurses and personal care aides to early childhood educators and social workers.
So you're saying that instead of viewing care work as a burden, we should see it as an opportunity.
Precisely. The ILO estimates that the care economy has the potential to create millions of new jobs in the coming years.
Just imagine the possibilities.
That's incredibly exciting. But we have to make sure that these are good jobs.
Right.
Not just more low-paying, exploitative positions.
We don't want to perpetuate the very problems that plague parts of the care sector today.
You're absolutely right. Decent work conditions and fair pay are non-negotiable. Care workers deserve living wages, benefits, opportunities for training and advancement, and most importantly, the right to organize and advocate for themselves.
It's about recognizing the value of this work, not just in words, but in action.
Exactly. Only then can we truly transform the care economy into a force for social and economic justice, one that uplifts individuals, strengthens families, and creates a more equitable and prosperous world for everyone.
It sounds like we're on the cusp of a potential paradigm shift, where care work is no longer relegated to the shadows, but takes its rightful place as a cornerstone of a thriving society.
But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's step back to a fundamental question that underpins this entire conversation. If we could assign a monetary value to all the unpaid care work happening every day, how would that change our understanding of economic productivity and gender equality?
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It's like we have this massive blind spot in our economic models, failing to account for the tremendous value of the work that sustains our lives and allows our societies to function.
It's like we've been operating with only half the data.
Completely undervaluing and overlooking a significant portion of the global economy.
Right. Imagine if we could quantify the economic worth of all the childcare, elder care, and other forms of unpaid care work happening every single day.
It would be a game changer, wouldn't it?
Absolutely. It would revolutionize how we measure economic output, understand productivity, and design policies.
And perhaps most importantly, it would expose the true extent of gender inequality.
Because right now, so much of that unpaid care work is being shouldered by women.
Often at the expense of their own economic opportunities and well-being.
You got it.
Yeah.
Recognizing the economic value of unpaid care work isn't just about fairness. It's about creating a more accurate and complete picture of how our economies truly function. It's about acknowledging the invisible labor that sustains us all.
And it's about time we start giving it the credit it deserves.
Well said. And on that note, I think we've covered a lot of ground today.
We've explored the often invisible world of care work.
From its profound impact on gender equality to its potential as a driver of economic growth.
We've delved into policy solutions.
We've examined global variations.
And even dared to imagine a future where care work is recognized and valued for what it truly is. Essential.
But as with any deep dive, we've only just scratched the surface. There's so much more to uncover, to question, and to discuss.
Absolutely. And that's the beauty of this, isn't it? The learning never stops.
So as we wrap up this insightful conversation,
what's one key takeaway you want our listeners to ponder as they continue to navigate this complex and ever-evolving world of care?
That's a great question.
I think the most important thing is to remember that care work is happening all around us.
In every corner of the globe.
Often invisibly and often without the recognition it deserves.
That's so true. It's happening in our homes, in our communities, and on a global scale.
Exactly. So the next time you see a parent struggling to juggle childcare with work or a family member caring for an aging loved one, take a moment to acknowledge their efforts.
Recognize their invisible labor.
Yes. And ask yourself, how can I, in my own way, contribute to a world that values and supports care work?
How can I be a part of the solution?
Those are powerful questions, and ones that I hope our listeners will continue to ponder long after this episode ends. Because the reality is, care work is everyone's work.
Absolutely. It's time we start treating it that way. It's like we've been looking at a map with a huge chunk missing, assuming we had the full picture, when In reality, we've been ignoring a fundamental aspect of how our world works.
That's a great analogy. And if we could somehow illuminate that missing piece, if we could assign a monetary value to all the unpaid care work happening globally,
It would be transformative.
it would be transformative. Think about it.
Mm.
How would our understanding of economic productivity change if we factored in the countless hours spent caring for children, the elderly, and those with disabilities?
It would be like suddenly realizing that a huge portion of what we consider leisure time is actually labor, essential labor that's keeping our families and communities afloat.
Exactly. It would force us to confront the reality that a significant portion of our economies is built on the backs of unpaid and often undervalued care work, primarily performed by women.
It shines a whole new light on those global gender disparities we've been discussing.
Yeah.
It's not just about the wage gap anymore.
Right.
It's about recognizing the vast amount of unpaid work that women disproportionately shoulder. Work that's essential but often invisible in traditional economic models.
Precisely. Putting a price tag on unpaid care work would expose those inequalities and force us to grapple with their far-reaching consequences.
It's almost like we've created an economic system that relies on this hidden workforce, one that's expected to provide these essential services without compensation or recognition.
It's a sobering thought, isn't it? And it speaks to the urgent need for a paradigm shift in how we value and support care work, both paid and unpaid. It's not just a women's issue, it's a societal issue, an economic issue, and a human rights issue.
It makes you wonder, what would our world look like if we truly invested in care as a public good? If we recognize the essential role that care work plays in all of our lives, from cradle to grave?
It's a question worth pondering. Imagine a world where accessible, affordable childcare was the norm, not a luxury. A world where families had the support they needed to care for aging parents and loved ones without having to choose between their jobs and their families. A world where care workers were valued, respected, and fairly compensated for their essential contributions to society.
It's a vision of a more just, equitable, and compassionate world, one that recognizes the fundamental importance of care in all its forms. And while we may not have all the answers, I think this deep dive has given us a lot to think about, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. We've explored the often invisible world of care work, uncovering its complexities, its challenges, and its immense potential to reshape our world for the better.
We've learned about the care penalty that holds women back economically, the power of policy to drive change, and the vast untapped economic potential of the care sector.
And most importantly, we've been reminded that care work is everyone's work. It's the foundation upon which our families, our communities, and our societies are built.
So as we wrap up this incredibly insightful conversation, what's one final thought you'd like to leave our listeners with?
Remember that even small acts of care can have a ripple effect. Check in on a neighbor who's a caregiver, advocate for family-friendly policies at your workplace, or simply take the time to listen to and appreciate the caregivers in your own life.
Because care work, in all its forms, is the work that makes all the other work possible.
Beautifully said.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the world of care work. Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep caring.